So with the Springboks versus Ireland 2-match series just around the corner, it is time to do a starting XV. Now it is extremely tricky to pick just 15 of the Springboks 39 players to go on the starting lineup. They've got great depth at the moment, which is of course a tremendous thing to have, definitely heading into a physical series up against the Irish side. But looking through, first of all, at my front row, now I will mention this is not necessarily what I think Rassi Erasmus will do for some of these selections that I've gone with. This is just what I think personally might be the key to success for the Springboks side. But the front row, I have gone number 1, Oxnashe, number 2, Bongi, and number 3, Frans Malherbe. Now I know that that selection of Bongi, some people may say that I should have gone with Malcolm Marx, but I feel like Marx is still very much that impact player off the bench that he has always been for the Springboks. He's the super sub, and anytime he makes his way off the bench, he always offers a lot of impact. Bongi, he's had the benefit of playing quite a few games throughout the URC, did look a little bit better out of the two of them in that first match up against the Welsh, which I think a lot of people were surprised by, because Malcolm Marx, of course, even though he's been away for a long time from that Springbok kit, such an experienced player, such a talent, and people expected him to just pick up from where he left off. Wasn't quite the case, but I'm sure he will get back to where he was. But for now, I'm going with Mbonambi in the front row. Oxnashe, absolute tank of an individual. He's had 4 turnovers won throughout the URC season, also made 56 tackles with a completion rate of 84%. So he is definitely one that I would have in my front row. And also with the absence of Steven Kitshoff, I feel like that decision was a lot easier to make. Frans Malherbe, the man's just massive, isn't he? He's a great scrummager. He's a great worker in terms of that Springbok 4-pack as well. And he wouldn't look out of place in a match up against the Irish. But looking at my locks now, for number 4, I did go with Eben Etzebeth, the 6'8", 120 kg lock for the Boks. He brings physicality anytime he's on the field, and also something that he did quite well throughout the URC was actually getting those line-out steals for the Sharks side. So that is another reason why I would put him in the starting lineup. I don't think there's really any debate here, though, for that number 4 jersey. For as long as he wants it, Eben Etzebeth has got that jersey. Number 5, I've gone with Franco Mostert. Now, the locks intrigue me a little bit for the Springboks because they have got Salman Moura. They do have RG Snyman back into the running now. Still no Ludiacha, but I would definitely have Mostert as the starting 5 and then have RG Snyman coming off the bench, unless, of course, they go with maybe a 5-3 split. Then it wouldn't be a bad idea to have Franco Mostert off the bench just because of that little bit more versatility that he can offer for the Springbok side, although more than likely the 6-2 split, maybe even a 7-1 is what we will see in the matches up against Ireland. Number 6, I've gone with the captain, Siya Kolisi. For some people, they don't even have this man in their starting side, but I always wonder how that can be. He's had a great career for the Springboks. He brings that experience, he brings that passion, brings the captaincy qualities that you want in a number 6, and also it became a lot easier after watching that game between Wales and South Africa, as it just seems like Quagga Smith at the moment is out of form, so it makes perfect sense to put Siya Kolisi back in that number 6 jersey. Number 7, Peter Steph-Toy. That man's got that jersey well and truly grasped, just like Eben Etzebeth, and he's just a phenomenal talent. He's going to be a handful in the series up against Ireland. We've got to remember, more than likely, going head-to-head with Josh van den Vlaar and Caelan Doris at times, Jack Conan in there as well. It's going to be immense to see what happens in the loose forward trios. And I think that the physicality of the two sides is going to be so important. Getting that ruck dominance, and someone who just oozes physicality is this man that I've got at number 8, which is Evan Ruiz. So he has been looking great throughout the URC. Just looking through at some of the stats, he's had, well, that one's not great. That's his penalty conceded number. He's had 20 of those, second in the competition. But other than that, he has had 8 tries. He's had 103 successful carries, which is the second most in the URC competition. 49 defenders beaten. That is second equal in the URC. 671 metres carried, 18th in the URC competition. He's made 151 tackles, and he's also had 14 turnovers won, which is the 6th most in the United Rugby Championship. So the man has been working extremely hard. When you consider the other options that the Storm is having, that loose forward trio, it also makes it more impressive with the fact that he is getting consistent game time. That discipline, though, is something that makes me a bit concerned. But last week's game up against Wales seemed to have a hold of it. I think he only gave away a penalty for a deliberate knockdown. Other than that, though, he did have a very solid game. So that closes out my Springbok forward pack. Now we look through at the back line, and I feel like this is where a lot more people will have differences. The forward pack, I think, is relatively straightforward, although there are certain players that maybe Rassie wants to give the opportunity to. Maybe in that loose forward trio, we see Pepsi Buthelezi take on that 8 jersey. In the front row, perhaps we do see Malcolm Marx starting, or maybe even Johan Grobbelaar's name gets thrown into the hat somewhere along this Irish series. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does there, but of course this backline, this is where, if there is going to be a kicking battle, the South Africans want to be on top of it, and that is why, controversially, I've gone with Faf de Klerk as my number 9. Now, I know a lot of people would go with Grant Williams. They've also got Morne van den Berg. They've got Cobus Reinach. They've got options for days in that 9 jersey, and all 4 of them, I believe, would do a decent job up against Ireland. Faf de Klerk, I don't think he did too much wrong in that game up against Wales. He was weighting his box kicks really well throughout that game, I thought. There were a few moments, of course, that were a bit shaky, but that is to be expected when you're coming back into his side after not playing for them since a Rugby World Cup final. But I feel like the 9 is somewhere that they definitely need to have control of for the box, which is why I feel like the 2 front runners for that would be either Faf de Klerk, maybe Grant Williams, but who knows? Maybe Williams is going to be out on the wing. They've got the 4 halfbacks. It's what they did throughout their Rugby World Cup. Maybe Rassie still has a couple tricks up that sleeve that he hasn't quite shown us yet, but maybe we get to see it. And the Irish series number 10, I've gone with Handré Pollard. I feel like he is the safe option. The kicking's strong. Maybe you're not going to get that same type of attack that you would get from someone like a Mani Lebok. Sia Masuku, he's been left completely out of the side, although of course he is still on standby if there are any injuries. Jordan Hendrickse, another fly half that's been taken out of the running. So it is Lebok and it is Pollard. So the question mark for me is whether or not they start Pollard, have Lebok finish a game, or whether you have Lebok start and have Pollard finish a game when the pressure maybe is that little bit higher. But I would go with Handré Pollard definitely in the first test. Get some minutes under his belt, and perhaps with that kicking as well, could be the narrow margin that the Springboks require. We move on to the centres now, though. Number 12, Damien de Allende, and number 13, Jesse Kriel. Now, this is probably another situation that there are a lot of options that we could have gone with in that midfield combo. Andre Esterhuizen, he played in the game up against Wales. Sasha Feinberg Ngume Zulu looked very strong off the bench for the South Africans in that last contest. There's too many options to be able to just select 2, but I've gone with the experience, definitely for that first match. Damien de Allende, he didn't get to play too much in that last contest, coming off the bench late. Jesse Kriel, I thought, did very well. Scored himself the first try in the match, and his pace is definitely something that will be extremely handy, more than likely matching up with Gary Ringrose. Whereas for Damien de Allende, he's going to have the fun time of marking up, more than likely, with Bundy Archie. But moving on to the back 3 now. This is where the Springboks have to be strong under the high ball, as well as defensively. They have to make sure that they don't put a foot wrong, so that when they are on attack, these men can also get themselves a lot of try. Number 11, I think, is probably the hardest position to pick in the side, to a certain extent. Now, for some people, they may say, what are you talking about? Makazole Mapimpi every day of the week. But now you've got some new names added into the squad. You've got Cheslin Colby back. You've also got Edwell van der Merwe, who I thought had a tremendous debut up against the Welsh, made a couple try-saving tackles, and for a man who was criticised for his defence throughout the URC season, tackling around that 80%, he certainly made those important tackles 100% of the time up against Wales. In last week's game, I don't know whether or not they will go with Makazole Mapimpi out on that wing. But then the problem that you've got is if you don't go with Makazole Mapimpi in the starting lineup, he's not a guy who you can bring off the bench. Whereas I feel like an Edouard van der Merwe or maybe even Cheslin Kolbe could be someone that you bring off the bench, seeing as they offer multiple positions, and also they seem to be able to finish a match, whereas Makazole Mapimpi, if he finishes a match, it's because he started it. Hopefully that makes sense, what I have just said there. But for me, I actually went with Cheslin Kolbe out on that left wing. A lot of people want to know where he is at in terms of his form, whether he's going to come into this game like a house on fire, or whether he will take a little bit longer to warm up to the challenge. Now, we don't actually really know who he's going to be going head-to-head with. The other wing's a little bit easier to predict in terms of what the Irish will go with. That is, of course, going to be James Lowe. So for James Lowe, number 14 for the Springboks, Kurtley Arendse. He recently played in that URC final. He'll be disappointed that the Bulls weren't able to get themselves the victory in that one. But throughout the URC season, that man has put out some very impressive stats. 10 tries to his name, 26 defenders beaten, 17 clean breaks, which is the 8th most in the URC, 645 metres carried. Just to put it into perspective though, he has had less metres carried than Evan Ruiz. Now, of course, with that final, I think he may have ticked just a little bit over. These stats were calculated at the time of that South Africa versus Wales game last week, but he's still got some great numbers, and it just shows what kind of impact Evan Ruiz could have in this game as well. He's also had 14 offloads, which I think could be extremely handy because Ireland are known for being able to make tackles and then get straight into that breakdown. But if you can stop them from being able to join and get that turnover by offloading the ball, keeping it alive, that is when your tries out wide will come, and that is where Kurtley Arendse could really set up some of his teammates, but also maybe be on the receiving end of an offload from one of the other box. But that only leaves us with one position, and it is number 15. Now, at the start of the season, I think if you had put this man's name as number 15 for the Springboks, people would have laughed in your face, and some even still would. But I have gone with Apalele Fasi as my starting 15 for the Springboks up against Ireland. Now, the two main options that they have at the moment is Apalele Fasi and also Willie le Roux. Now, Willie le Roux did not play in that URC final, and I'm not actually completely sure what his injury extent is. Now, I know he went off late. I believe it was in the semi-final, so he might be back and he may be raring to go, but I do still believe after the performance that he had up against the Welsh, I would go with Apalele Fasi as the Springboks starting fullback throughout the season. He has had 5 tries, 80 successful carries, which is the 5th most in the URC, 36 defenders beaten, 11th equal. He's had the most running meters made by any player in the United Rugby Championship with 1,230. Now, his tackling is a little bit of a concern. We'll come back to that, though, in the near future. But in that game up against the Welsh, he was absolutely phenomenal under that high ball. And that was one thing that really helped the Springboks in the territory battle up against Wales. They weren't losing ground because he wasn't dropping the ball at the back. He kept on taking it. He had his yellow card, which he was a bit unlucky. He extended that leg, but he'll learn from that mistake. Everything else, though, he was able to take cleanly, which is exactly what you want up against the Irish. Definitely if you have someone trying to kick it in behind, trying to force you back into your 22. If you're taking that ball and you're kicking it back, that is where the Springboks will not lose out on the territory battle. But I mentioned about his tackling just before. Throughout the URC season, he made 29 tackles. Now, remembering, he played 16 games, started 15 of them. So a lot of minutes out there on the field for the Sharks. He only made 63% of those tackles in the season, which is a little bit concerning because, of course, you don't want to have a fullback after a runaway that's only got a 50-50 chance of making that tackle. But I think at the moment he is up there in terms of Rassie's 15. I don't know whether Willie le Roux will be thrown straight in. Maybe in the second game up against the Irish is when we see him. But for now, I think Apalele Fasi is not too bad of an option whatsoever. The discipline and the tackling, though, those are the two things that he really needs to get right if he does want to have success in that Springboks number 15 jersey. Now, the other option, of course, that we didn't even mention is the fact that maybe someone like a Cheslin Kolbe could go to number 15 if needed. Maybe that is a way of putting him in the side as well as Makazole Mapimpi. That could be something the Boks look at doing. They could have a halfback out on the wing like they did last year. One thing that we've learned about Rassie Erasmus is just when you think you're starting to work out what he's doing, he completely does a 180 and does something completely different. So it's going to be entertaining. It's going to be exciting to see what he goes with in his starting lineup for this next game up against the Irish. It is less than 7 days away, ladies and gentlemen. We will be covering it on the channel, so if you are new, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. We will also have our lineup prediction later on in the week, where myself and Rabic predict what we think Rassie Erasmus will do in his starting side, because to be honest, this may not be far away, but there is also a chance we see a few of those other players get the nod in this first test. And alongside that, we will be doing the Springbok lineup announcement when Rassie Erasmus confirms his side for that first test match. But thank you all very much for tuning in, and I will see you all for the next one.